So at this point, I'm just debating renaming the podcast as Holden Storytime, because it's mostly just me talking to myself about things that have happened recently. In that vein, this month, let me take you on the journey of building a new PC, getting unreasonably angry at Razer, and then realising it was never their fault to begin with. So, if you listened to last month's podcast, you may remember towards the end of it when my entire PC crashed. Luckily I didn't lose anything, but it was at that point when I kind of realised that I couldn't deal with the issues I'd been having any longer. I'd had issues with my PC crashing for a long time, but I was always lucky that it never really happened during work, or rather, it happened a few times during renders, so then it was just a matter of start the render again. And it happened, I think, once or twice during an upload, and then it was like, start the upload again. But luckily it never happened during recording before, and then last month when it happened during recording, I was like, I can't deal with this anymore. So at that point, I was like, okay, let's finally build a new computer. I'd actually been waiting since November, so 6 months nearly at that point, to build a new PC, but there were just, with the current issue with getting parts, that wasn't really possible. I'd been trying to wait as long as possible to hope that parts would come back into stock, but it never happened. So I just decided to make do with what I could. So in the end, I spent some time looking around and I ended up settling on my second choice for a lot of things. Well, I say for a lot of things, only really for my CPU. I wanted to get a 5900X, I ended up getting a 5800X. It's not the worst thing, and I can always upgrade later if I really want to, but this seems pretty good so far. The only other thing I couldn't get was a GPU at all. So I'm using my old GPU still, which means despite having 2 computers, I've only got one that works, because the other one doesn't have any video out at all. Eventually I will get a new GPU. I'm going to get either a 3080 or the 3080 Ti when that eventually gets announced, because we know they exist, people have literally seen them, but they just haven't actually been announced yet. So it's functionally impossible to get either of them at the moment, so I'm just as likely to get them. But for the time being, I've got a 1080 Ti in my new computer, and a 5800X, an X570 Aorus Elite motherboard, 32GB of Vengeance RAM at 3600 MHz. I think the CAS latency is 18 or something, it's not amazing. I've got a 500GB WD Black SN850 as my boot drive, and a 1TB WD SN550, which I use just for launching applications. And then I got myself a new case as well, so I've got a NZXT H710 in black and red, because I always buy black and red, and I just quite like NZXT's cases. They're really nice. I do have some issues with it, but I'll get into that in a little bit. Besides the SSDs I've already mentioned for storage, I'm using the same hard drives as I had in my old computer. I'm also using the same old power supply. My old power supply is more efficient and a higher rating. It's 850 watt gold, and I did buy another power supply to put in my old one, but that's 750 bronze. So, I mean, it still would have been fine, but I moved all my old fans over, so they're all nice and red and glowy in that, and I've got a Kraken X73 for my cooler. I bought all of the parts, and they all came really quickly, which was great, except I had absolutely no time to build it. So, you can actually go back and check. I think it was the 3rd episode. It was either the 3rd or the 5th, but I'm pretty sure it was the 3rd episode of the Final Fantasy LP that I've just started, the 14 playthrough. It's going to kind of be a playthrough, but again, get into that later. During the middle of that, I got a knock on the door and I had to run away and get all my PC parts, because they all just turned up within a day of me ordering them. And then they just sat there taunting me for the best part of a week, because I had absolutely no time to build it, because, as I've mentioned, my new PC uses a lot of parts from my old PC, which meant when I was streaming and recording every day, I couldn't just take my old one apart, because there was no guarantee I'd have a PC at the end of the day. So what I ended up doing for that was waiting until the weekend. Yeah, I recorded all my videos for that week, and while they were rendering, I got to taking apart the new case and then installing as much into it as I could. Like putting the CPU and the motherboard and the RAM and the SSDs and that, and then putting it in my case. So that was like what I spent my time doing during the renders. Well, as soon as the renders were finished, I uploaded them, and then as soon as that was finished, I took my old computer apart as well. So at this point, it was about 3 o'clock on a Saturday, maybe, probably a bit later, and I had no working PCs, which was a very strange position for me to be in. I had like my new PC half built, and my old PC completely built, and I then took my old PC apart, which involved taking all of the fans out of it, because they were all the ones I wanted to move to my new one. I had to take my cooler out of it, I had to take my GPU out of it, I had to take the hard drives out of it, I had to take the power supply out of it, and then install my new power supply into it, replace all of the fans with other fans that I had. A lot of them were the original fans for that case, and then some of them were the fans from my new case, and then some of them were also the fans that came with the cooler, because like, I just had them spare, so I figured I might as well just throw them in while they were there. Because yeah, I swapped the fans out on my Kraken just so that I've got entirely matching fans in that case now. So once that was done, I had to install my old CPU cooler in my old PC, so that's back on a Hyper 212. And then that was my old PC basically complete, but I can't use it. So I then had to just get straight on with building my new one. Building in this case was very strange, because it was like half incredibly easy and half ridiculously difficult. And it was really frustrating at times. Like, one of the issues is it's got this hard drive cage that screws in through the bottom of the case. So you have to, like, put the hard drives in it and then lie the case on its side so you can screw in underneath it. But the issue is that the hard drive cage doesn't go all the way to the back. It has to be, like, floating. And when you've got that full of hard drives, that's, like, basically impossible. Which meant I had one hand, like, cramped underneath it, with the hard drives resting on top of it, and screwing in underneath it at the same time, and it was incredibly painful, because I had, like, the lip of the case, like, digging into my fingers, and they're all, like, large capacity hard drives, and large capacity hard drives are literally just heavier than small capacity ones. Like, there's 3 hard drives there, and there's, like, 21 terabytes of space. There's a 12, a 6, and a 3. So, like, that was awful. That was just installing it. In removing it in the first place was also awful, because this is a weird thing with this case where half the screws are thumb screws, and they're great. They work really well. The other half are these really tiny Phillips head ones, and they're legitimately awful. Because they were also way over-tightened, to the point where there's, I think, 3 screws I've completely stripped, and one that I just gave up on even trying to remove. Which means I have this, like, big red bar, which you're supposed to move to give you more space to put stuff in, and then, like, put it back afterwards so it hides the cables and stuff. I couldn't remove it, so I've just had to work around it. So there's just, like, loads of little things, like the screws that were just a fucking nightmare. But then there's, like, loads of really nice things, like the, like, pre-run cables in these, like, little, like, cable channels that have got, what are they called? Not zip ties. The cloth ones. I could just look it up, couldn't I? I was just talking about them earlier. Why can I not remember what these are fucking called? I'm just gonna have to fucking Google it, because it's gonna piss me off if I don't remember now. They literally just call them fucking cable ties, Jesus Christ. Okay, right, so these little, like, Velcro cable ties that are all, like, pre-run and everything, and it's actually really nice. There's a load of little things that are awful, like the screws, like I said. There's another load of little things which are amazing, like the cable runs, and the panels are, like, really easy, because they just, like, they have, like, buttons that you press on the side, and they just pop off. And this isn't actually, like, a good thing or a bad thing. It was just a very useful thing for me, in that the tray for your power supply is the same on the new case as it is on the old case, which meant I didn't have to take that off when I moved it over. Like, it's not really a big deal, but it was nice anyway. One last issue I did have is when it came to plugging all the cables in, because that big red bar, I couldn't get my 24 pin in properly. Not using it, at least, so it just, like, kind of hangs out and it looks kind of awful. And the other issue is, because of where the hard drive cage sits, my SATA power cables, like, dig in to the side panel of the case, which means if I put that sided panel on wrong, it did actually happen to me. It knocks the power cables out, and stops them from being detected because obviously there's no power going to them. Besides that, I didn't have many issues actually building it. There's a couple of little cable things which I'd like to tidy up, but I'm also planning on getting like new cables for the power supply at some point and maybe getting some more RAM. And eventually, as I've said, getting a new GPU altogether, so I'm probably going to leave that stuff until I've got that. One other nice thing as well is that I've managed to move it so it's on the other side of my desk now, so I can actually see it properly, which is nice. But anyway, so that was the physical build process. But when all that was done, I also had to flash the BIOS on the motherboard. So this like really worries me, because it's like kind of, if you're not familiar with it, it's like kind of the most dangerous part. Actually physically building it is obviously like dangerous, because like you could break it, or like if you electrocute it, it might die and stuff like that. But it's generally not that big of a deal. Like, it's pretty easy once you're used to it. But flashing the BIOS is like, it's worrying because if something goes wrong while it runs, your computer just dies. Well, your computer doesn't die, the motherboard dies, but you know, functionally the same. The reason it probably worries me more is that it is completely outside of your control. There is like nothing I could do. Like, if I break the motherboard, I broke the motherboard. If I flash the BIOS and it fucks up, that isn't like directly my fault, but the outcome is the same. So like that makes me worry more. I essentially worry more for things that are outside of my control than I worry about things that are within my control. Luckily for me, this motherboard has a BIOS flashback feature. It's called like Q-Flash, I think Gigabyte call it. So you don't even need like anything plugged into the, well, say plugged into, you don't need any like, you don't need a CPU or RAM or a graphics card in the board to do it. You just need power to the board. I did do it with everything plugged in because I'd already built it at this point, but technically you're supposed to do it without. I didn't have any issues, so like it was fine. The only thing I did do to make sure nothing went wrong was I plugged it into, I have a UPS, which is an uninterruptible power supply. So even if I had like a blackout at the time, there'd still be power going to the motherboard, and it's got like 15-20 minutes, which isn't like a huge amount of time, but it should be more than enough time for a BIOS flash. So that's like the only like real precaution I took when it came to do it. It was just a matter of like, you put a file on a memory stick that's formatted in the FAT format, rename it to, I think it was like gigabyte.bin, something like that. Plug it into the correct port on the back of your motherboard, turn it on, and press the Q-Flash button at the same time, and then that button starts flashing, and then you just walk away and don't touch it, and like leave your hands in the air so you can't accidentally knock it, and then wait for it. It took about 3 minutes, and then it was just done. It just worked. So I was like incredibly happy with that process. All in all, the physical build took about 6 hours, and then the BIOS flash literally took like 5 minutes. I actually like did that the next day because I was worried about it so much I didn't want to do it, because it was gone like 10 o'clock by the time we actually finished physically building the PCs, because my wife helped me a bit. She mostly did fans and stuff. So I didn't feel comfortable doing it at that time. Just because like I was not mentally prepared for it. I left it for the next day and flashed it then, and everything was fine. So then it was just install Windows, which I did. And that was mostly fine. One thing that was very nice is that installing Windows on an NVMe drive is so much faster. Like, I've installed it on hard drives and I've installed it on SATA drives before, and obviously the SATA is already fast, but the NVMe drive, it like installed in like 5 minutes. It was fucking ridiculous. It was so quick. And then I just basically had a working computer. So I spent the next few hours just updating Windows, and then I had this weird issue start. After a couple of Windows updates, it started to boot, but only if I had the install media still in the computer. So it wouldn't just boot to my C drive. It had to boot into the install media and then continue from there into my boot drive, and I have no idea why. And I did it about 4 times, and then the 5th time it just started working. So I have no idea what happened in the meantime, but whatever, it was fine. It was still very odd, but it resolved itself, so I'm not too worried. So then it was just a matter of installing all the software and stuff. So I started with my basic stuff like OBS, because I actually did some recordings in between doing a lot of the extra stuff, because, like, I needed to, because I was getting behind. Steam, obviously, because games. Discord, Chrome, all that shit. And then I installed and updated from Adobe CS6. I had basically the entire suite of that. I upgraded from that to finally using Creative Cloud, which I don't like so far. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't work, because it does. But there's just, like, a lot of little things that about it that bother me. Like, why can I not just install the fucking applications I want? Why do I have to install the Creative Cloud application to install the applications I actually want? Like, I don't want Creative Cloud application, you can fuck off. I don't want to store my project files in the cloud. I'm fine with them being on my PC. Like, I have a backup. I don't work with other people. I don't need it. It's just annoying. And also, like, constantly fucking giving me notifications that I don't care about. It keeps giving me notifications about, like, updating stuff. And it just never seems to stop. But that's, like, just vague annoyances, really. I did have to update all of my files from CS6 to Creative, 2021 ones, which has mostly gone okay. In terms of, like, the actual, like, editing files, that's all gone okay. The only issue I have had is with Illustrator, because the default color profile for Illustrator is a different color profile than I was using on my old computer, and I can't go back and check. So I've done my best to find the one that's closest to it, but also in the update process, it seems to have, like, changed how the colors render as well. So, like, I realised they would look different if you're using a different colour profile, but I mean, like, it's actually changed them from being the colours that I use. So, I use it's 8-bit RGB, and it's 9601E1E. Yeah, that's right. That's, like, the hex code for the red that I use, and it's just a red and black, and that's, like, it. In updating it, it's changed it, and I can change it back, but when I change it back, because it's in a different colour profile, it also looks different. So I'm, like, constantly trying to, like, find the right colour profile and change the colours all back manually as well, which is why some of my thumbnails now will look a bit different. Hopefully I'll be able to, like, get them looking exactly the same. I've got them close now. It's a little bit darker than it used to be, but otherwise it's, like, close enough that it shouldn't be too big of a deal. You shouldn't really be able to notice. Eventually I might just update to the new darker colour, but I would hope to find a way of keeping it back with the old one instead. Other than that, though, like, that's been basically painless. So there was two reasons why I built a new computer. One is because of the crashing, and the other is because the render times on my old computer was getting ridiculous. So, a normal video, like a half-hour video, would take somewhere between half an hour and 45 minutes to render at my old settings. I say old settings because I've got new ones now. My old settings it was a VBR2 pass. It was 10 target, 40 megabyte max. This will mean nothing for, like, the vast majority of you, but for some of you it'll, like, mean something. What else? 25, 60 by 40, and 30 FPS. And that was, like, my old default render settings. There's probably more bits, but yeah, that was it. Yeah, using the H.264 encoder. And those would take, like, half an hour to 45 minutes. A Yakuza episode, with them being longer, would take close to 2 hours to render. And with doing a lot more now, in terms of, like, videos, because I'm now doing, like, close to 14 videos a week, if you include your streams and that, I just don't have that much time to be wasting anymore. Because you basically set your render up and then don't touch your computer for a day. Because I was rendering, like, 3 to 5... No, 3... I think the most I ever rendered in one day was, like, 12. So somewhere between 3 and 12 videos a day. Not a day, but, like, on a Saturday I tend to render all of my stuff in one go. So I actually do recordings and editing during a week, and then set Saturday aside to render everything. Because, like, I had to. So that would basically be me without a computer for an entire day. Like, I had a laptop, so I'd use it to do, like, other work, or I'd just, like, play games in the meantime. It was nice to have, like, a break from recording. But it got to the point where it was just, like, it was frustrating me too much. So that was one of the reasons why I built this, because it's just more powerful. And with the newer software, hopefully I would get better render times. And I did. So, at the settings I have already laid out, it would now render in about half the time it used to. So, a Yakuza video was rendering in an hour, and a half-hour video was rendering in, 20 minutes. It was all really nice. But one time I just accidentally left it on the default render settings, and the video rendered in 10 minutes, and I was like, what? Would it have done this on my old computer as well? Probably not actually that fast, but 10 minutes is way better. I had a look and the output is basically the same. You can't really tell. The videos that have come out this week have been rendered with the new settings, and the videos that came out last week were with the old settings, and I can't tell the difference. There is a very slight size difference. The file is slightly less compressed, which doesn't bother me, because I've got enough space to store it, and if I needed to, at that fucking amount of time, I could just delete the rendered file after it's rendered, because I keep all the source stuff, obviously. I could just delete the rendered file, and that would free up the space I'm using to store that. But it takes 10 minutes to render now. Even a Yakuza takes 10 minutes to render. That's fucking ridiculous. It's so much faster. It's gotten to the point where I can now record and render a video within an hour. It's so much better for me. Or rather, it would have been. Because when it came to uploading those videos the first week, I say the first week, it was this week, I did my first set of uploads, and during it started being a bit weird, and then it just crashed. I say crashed, but it didn't technically crash, it actually froze. My computer just completely froze, became completely unresponsive. So, when I've talked about my old computer freezing, I've talked about my old computer crashing, technically it wasn't crashing, it was freezing too. This is exactly the same freeze on my new PC as I had on my old PC, which obviously tells me it's a software issue with something I've done. So at this point, I'm just really frustrated, because I've spent a shit ton of money on a new computer, and it's broken in exactly the same way as the old one was. Turns out some of the render issues were my fault in the first place, so I feel at this point like I've just wasted a load of money. When the freeze first started happening on my old computer, I spent a lot of time looking through stuff, in Event Viewer, and I thought I had tracked it down to a driver issue with my headphones. So I was like, okay, I'll just reinstall the drivers again and maybe it'll work. And it seemed to work on my old computer, at least for a little bit, but then started happening again and again. And I was like, okay, and that's when I started to think it was a PC issue rather than a software issue. It turns out it wasn't, but whatever, that's why I had that thought. So when it happened again on this computer, I was like, it's probably the same thing as it used to be. So I reinstalled the drivers, and it still kept crashing. Now, I have a shit ton of Razer stuff. I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 8 Razer devices plugged into my PC right now. I have more that I don't use. I also have, a Razer phone 2. I have the Razer phone wireless charger. I have, a second pair of Razer headphones. I have, a lot of Razer shit. I quite like Razer shit. But I'm is this a Razer issue? Because, as I said, I thought it was an issue with the headphones. I didn't want to, because I use a Tartarus. But I thought I might have to uninstall Synapse. Synapse? It's the same thing. The reason I didn't want to is because uninstalling Synapse means that you can't use the macros on the Tartarus, and I use those to do work. Editing stuff tied to it. Normalizing my audio in Audacity, which I'm using to record right now. Just loads of little macros and stuff that make my editing flow a lot faster. So I didn't really want to uninstall Synapse. But if it was the only thing I could do, there were things I could do to work around that limitation. So what I ended up doing was uninstalling Synapse just to see if it helped. And at first it seemed to. I didn't get any crashes. And I was thinking, well, maybe it's a hardware issue with the headphones and stuff, so I'll just unplug stuff. So I unplugged every Razer device I could, except for mouse, keyboard, and my Tartarus, and my speakers are Razer ones as well. So I unplugged everything I could, like, get away with not using, and then tried it again. And it seemed to work. So, no synapse. Some of the devices, but it seems to be okay. And so I started looking into some extra software. So the software you can use called OpenRGB. Every single different RGB device basically uses different software to control it, and it's really fucking annoying. Like, I have technically got 4 different ones installed on this computer right now. I actually uninstalled most of them after setting up the profiles, but yeah, so OpenRGB is a thing where a guy made it to basically work with every piece of RGB like hardware that he could. Like, and they still keep updating it to add more. And that works with all the Razer stuff. So I was like, at least now I can still control the RGB. Which I don't really actually want to do. I actually just want to set them all to red. It won't just save that to the things that, like, I have little issues. I have, like, issues with the Razer. Anyway, so there's that, and there's another thing called Auto Hotkey. So Auto Hotkey will do, like, keyboard macros when you press certain keys and shit like that. So it was basically a way of using my Tartarus without having to have Synapse installed. So I get to installing this stuff, and then my PC crashes. Or rather, freezes. And it's exactly the same freeze as it used to be. And at this point, I had no Synapse installed. I had, like, the bare minimum stuff, like, plugged into it. And I was like, why? Why is this happening to me still? At this point, I'm, like, just Googling constantly for Razer crashes. Or, like, issues with Razer stuff causing freezes and crashes. And I've been doing this for basically a year and never found anything similar. Like, I say not similar. I mean, like, I found people who like, ooh, Synapse caused my PC to crash. And it's been, like, a one-time thing, and it's not been the same behaviours. Because the freeze I get is the same behaviour every single time. It is, my computer slows down, and I can still use my mouse, but everything just goes... It's weird. It's hard to describe, because at first you just sort of, like, feel that it's not right. And if you're fast enough, you can go into Task Manager and close processes, and if I just closed enough processes, it started working again. That was actually one of the reasons why I thought it was Razer, because it seemed to always start working again after I closed the Razer processes. One of the reasons I couldn't do that on my new PC is because actually with my new PC being faster, it meant that the freeze happened faster. It sounds kind of weird, but with my old PC being a slower PC overall, I had more time to react to the freeze before my computer just locked up completely. But, like I say, so, like, I'd get the same exact behaviours every single time, and the only way to resolve it was to just, like, power off the computer. Like, shutdowns do nothing, like, couldn't log out, couldn't do Task Manager, couldn't do anything, just had to, like, hard power down the computer, and then turn it back on again, and then it'd take a couple of extra seconds to boot each time, and that was, like, it. So I'm like, well, what else could be doing it? Because I had, like, barely anything installed on this computer at this point. Like, I've uninstalled all of the extra shit that I could get away with uninstalling. Like, I uninstalled all the stuff for the RGB, like I was talking about. I uninstalled basically every application I didn't need expressly just to do work. I didn't have a huge amount installed anyway, but, like, I uninstalled even those that I could. The only thing I didn't uninstall was the software for controlling my cooler, which is the NZXT cam software. So I'm like, well, what if it's that? Because I read somewhere that the cam software isn't great. So I was like, well, it's the only thing I've not checked. So I googled the sentence, cam causing computer to freeze. And the first result is an accurate description of the same freeze that I'd been having for a year. And it was literally line for line exactly the same. Like, it was laid out in bullet points, and every single bullet point was just exactly what happened to my computer, one after the other, until I had to power it down, and I was like, what the fuck? I'd spent so long trying to fix it, and so long, like, literally over a year of my life, complaining about Razer having this shitty software, and it turns out it wasn't Razer at all. Like, at no point have Razer been at fault. I mean, okay, like, that's kind of a lie. Like, some of the stuff isn't great. Like, it doesn't always work the way it should do. I had, like, a weird issue at one point with my Tartarus where it just randomly lose connection, and I'd have to unplug it and plug it back in again, and then it'd start working. But yeah, turns out none of it was Razer's fault. It was all the NZXT cam software. And I just turned it off. And I've not had a crash since. Now, I would uninstall it, but the cooler doesn't have a onboard memory, so I can't like load a profile onto it for the fans. So what I've been doing instead is, as soon as my computer boots, it comes up, and then I just immediately close it as soon as the profile's loaded. And that was like 3 or 4 days ago at this point, which granted isn't that long, but considering I couldn't go an hour without it crashing before, and I've now been 3 or 4 days without it having any issues, I would say it's probably resolved. It would be very nice if NZXT would fix this, but I guess they don't want to. I say that because the result that I found is like 4 years old, and they keep putting out updates that which apparently fix it, and they never fix it. It's just been the same issue affecting new people. Like, when I did it, I happened to look. The last reply to that post had been made about 20 minutes before I found it, and it just said, yeah, I'm having this issue too. And it's just like, maybe you should fix it then. But anyway, I've now turned cam off, reinstalled all my Razer stuff, reinstalled Synapse, and everything works fine. So, you can now see why this podcast is called I'm Sorry Razer, because I'm sorry Razer, it wasn't your fault, I just thought it was. You can forgive me for feeling like it was with all the other little issues I've had with you over the last few years, but I say that like other people know. I have a weird issue with my phone where if I use the wireless charger, it randomly crashes, but if I use the plugged in charger, it doesn't. So the wireless charger I've got is basically useless, but luckily I got it for free anyway. But overall though, my new PC is really good. It looks a lot nicer. It runs a lot faster. Now without the cam software, it doesn't crash. The only issue I do have with it actually is that the 5800X is just a very hot CPU. My old CPU was a 5820K, and at max, I was seeing temperatures of like 50. Like, that was like a really high temperature for me, was a 50. I'm now using this one, and it was reaching like 80s. Like, not regularly, but it was reaching 70 pretty regularly, and then going up to like an 80 if it could. And I was like, yeah, I'm not happy with this. Because the thing that was really bothering me was it basically wouldn't turbo any faster. So it turbo up to 4.9 gigahertz, which is really fast. And wouldn't turbo any faster, but would still just keep getting hotter and hotter. And I'm like, not really happy with this. So I spent some time looking at how to fix it. There are 2 reasons why it bothered me. 1, that's really hot. 2, it's really fucking loud. Because all of my fans in my PC would get really fucking loud because they go really fast to try and cool it down. But it was doing this with like random spikes. So it'd like spike up to like 75 degrees. So all of my fans would ramp up massively. And then it just immediately cool back down again because all it was doing was like loading Chrome. And it's just infuriating. So I spent like a while, like, I used the, what's it called, Ryzen Master software to try and underclock it a bit. I didn't seem to do anything. I'd read that the eco mode helped. It didn't. I reseated my cooler just in case it was a contact issue. It wasn't. In the end, what I did was I went into the BIOS and I turned the PBO on, which is Precision Boost Override. And what you're supposed to do with that is, 1, you can just leave it to run automatically, in which case it just does, like, goes as high as possible. The other thing you could do is do it manually, where you, like, set you new limits. So if a limit was, like, 100%, you'd set it to, like, 110%, and it'd give it, like, more power and stuff. Or you can also do the opposite of that and lower it. So I lowered all of them. And then I also changed the thermal limit. So the thermal limit is the point at which it starts to throttle itself down. So, like, the thermal limit for the CPU by default is something like 90. So it hits 90 degrees and then starts throttling down. So it runs at a slower speed to not increase the temperature anymore. So I lowered that from 90 to 65 because even 65 is too warm for me. The actual reason is because it would hit 4.9 gigahertz at 65 degrees and then just stay at 4.9 gigahertz but keep getting hotter. And I was like, I'd rather you just not go that high in the first place. So I underclocked it using the PBO. I set the thermal limit lower, and it started running still warmer than I'd like, but at a much more reasonable temperature, at least in my opinion. The issue being, though, the fans would still ramp up really fucking loud. They would still get incredibly loud under the slightest load. Like I say, the way it works, it just boosts as high as it can as soon as the small load is put on it, and then clocks itself down afterwards. So what I ended up doing there was going into the cam software, which is why I've still kept it installed, and changed it so that the fans run at the temperature of the water, not based on the temperature of the CPU. So they would used to run where it was like the CPU reached 65 degrees, and the fans would go at 100%. Expel the heat as fast as possible. So what I did was I changed it so that it runs based on the temperature of the water. So when the water reaches 40 degrees, the fans will ramp up, I think, to 50% I ended up setting it at. The water never reaches that high a temperature. It's maybe 30, which is a couple of degrees above ambient. And I'm yeah. So the fans actually run at 400 RPM at all times. My computer is so much quieter than my old computer was. Even with a hotter CPU running in it and more power overall. All because I just changed a couple of values around. It's just great. Overall I'm pretty happy with it. There's still things I would change. I would really still like a 5900X. And I really want a new GPU. But can't get either of those. So this'll do for now, and in terms of it's doing pretty well. So what have I used it for? Obviously, one thing I've not used it for is for the longer form scripted content this month. Mostly just because building this took a lot of time, but also because I don't really have any good ideas at the moment. I have ideas, but I usually flesh them out a little bit and then turn it into a script. And I have very bare bones ideas, and I just building a new computer and writing a script and starting new stream series and starting new LPs, it was just too much for me. So I cut back on the longer form scripted content, because I say longer because it's not long form. It's not like my videos are 20 minutes to 4 hours. They're maybe max out at 10. If it's a list, these sometimes go to 20, but even then it's not even always that long. I would hope, though, that by this time next month, I'll be back on track. Got more time now. I've obviously got more time now because I'm not waiting for renders and stuff. Also, a lot of my recording stuff is going faster as well. So, as I've said, I've started that 14 playthrough. So, it's a Final Fantasy XIV kind of playthrough, because I'm only doing the free trial, so it'll just be till the end of Heavensward. I'm also only doing it twice a week. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I stream at 12 English time, 12 PM. At the moment we're in BST. I stream for somewhere between 1 and 3 hours on those days. And that's been going pretty well. I've done 7 episodes so far. At time of recording tomorrow, I'll be doing my 8th. And I'm definitely enjoying it. But from what I understand, it's going to take fucking forever. I'm doing at max 6 hours a week. At the moment, it's not even that much. It's more 3. And up to the end of Heavensward is something 200 hours, depending on how you do it. And I do it the long way, always, where I spend it as long as possible doing all of the side quests and stuff as well. So, at that rate, what? 240 divided by 3 is, what? 80? Yeah, 80 weeks. So that's just under 2 years. So yeah, it'll be done in 2023. Maybe by that point, they'll have increased the free trial to also include... What's the one after Heavensward? Is the one between Heavensward and Shadowbringers? Stormblood. Yeah, that's what I mean. Right, so maybe by that point they'll have added Stormblood into it as well. I completely forgot Stormblood was a thing. Yeah, so then there'll be even more of me doing it. I can't afford to be paying monthly for an MMO that I'm going to play a couple of hours a week, on top of everything else I do. But I also did want to play 14. So, this is making me play 14. And I'm not paying for it at the moment. So it's working for me pretty well. I'm enjoying being an archer, which is nice. I'm also a cat. one of the Mikote. I tried to make them look as much like me as possible, although it does obviously have, like, extra ears and a tail. But no, I'm liking it so far. I'm not very far in. I like it when people come to those streams, because it's nice. It's, like, kind of relaxing. But other than that, yeah, it's going pretty well. I have also, this month, as I've said, started a Monster Hunter playthrough. So I'm going through Monster Hunter Rise. Now, it's a little bit weird, because I think at this point you won't have seen, but what I've basically been doing is just my first hunt. So I've done, like, all of the village missions, and, like, all of the hub missions as a video. I've done, like, each of the first times, but then, like, in my off time, I've also been going back and, like, hunting more just to get, like, the armor sets and stuff. So there will be times when a video starts and I'll be wearing different armor than I was at the end of the last episode, and, like, I don't want people to get really confused because, like, they've missed something. They've not. It's just that, like, you don't need to watch me fight fucking, like, see me fight, like, a Yaku, like, 90 fucking times. You don't. So I'll show you the first hunt of each one of them, and then I'll go on and hunt it on my own afterwards. But yeah, it's going pretty well. I think I've recorded enough episodes of that to do up to the end of May. Maybe June by now. I'm still recording more. Like, because there's only 2 episodes coming out a week, it's gonna take a while. But yeah, like, I'm enjoying it. It's really good. Like, a lot of issues that I had with the old Monster Hunter games that I don't have with this one. Like, I used to have a lot of issues with my first Monster Hunter that I actually, like, really put time into was 4. Well, 4U. And for one thing I didn't like, it was on the DS. Well, 3DS. And for another, I don't like the segmented maps. I'm also not a big fan of, like, having to carry around pickaxes and stuff like that. So I didn't really get into Monster Hunter as a thing until World. And I really liked World. There's a lot of World stuff on my channel. But Rise is a lot like World. It's a lot like the other games as well, but it's also a lot like World, where it's got, like, contiguous maps. And you don't have to, like, carry pickaxes around with you and stuff like that. Like, I really like it. Like, I'm really enjoying it. There's a couple of monsters I'm not a big fan of hunting. Like, Basarios, I think he's called. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I've never heard it said out loud. And the Almudron. Mostly just because I played Dual Blades and you bounce off those a lot. And it's just frustrating. But generally, I've not had any issues with the hunts. Like, I've enjoyed all of them. Like, it seems like really good. There's a couple of things I didn't quite get at the start of the game that I understand better now. But yeah, I'm, like, really enjoying my time with it. But yeah, that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. Like, I think that one will probably finish this year. God, that's still so long. But yeah, I'll have that game finished by the end of this year, more than likely. And I'll probably just drop back in every now and again for, like, events and stuff. Eventually I will probably stop, just because, to be, like, really clear, I do fall off past the endgame stuff, because, like, I don't know what's in this, but using World for an example, I just didn't enjoy fighting the tempered stuff. Like, it just wasn't interesting. It was just, like, the same monsters, but it took longer to kill them. And that was supposed to be interesting, and it just isn't. Like, I would rather them add new monsters than them add harder variants of the existing monsters, because I just don't really find... Like, difficulty creep isn't interesting to me. Like, new things are interesting to me. So, fighting a harder Diablos is less interesting to me than fighting a completely different monster. Like, even Black Diablos is more interesting than just harder Diablos, and Black Diablos is basically just harder Diablos. But, like, there's variants. Like, the variants are at least somewhat interesting. I also wish they'd add more low-rank content. Like, I get why they don't, but just be nice. Just be nice to people. Just give them more stuff. Like, you don't... Just because you add a new monster in doesn't mean you need to add in only the hard version of the monster. Like, it's just nice. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, but anyway. That was just me going off on a tangent of, like, Monster Hunter stuff. In terms of my other LP, the Yakuza 0 recordings have gone much faster recently. I think 2 weeks ago, I just reached chapter 10. And in the last week, I've gotten from chapter 10 to chapter 15 it's gotten so much faster because I'm also now not doing a lot of the side quests. That's not because I'm avoiding them, it's just because I got so many of them done already. I think at this point Majima's got like 7 left, and Kiryu's got more. Kiryu's got like 15 or so. But even so, like, I've done so many of the side quests already that there's just less for me to do. So I'm leaving it until as late as possible now. I'm just getting through the story as fast as possible because I'm enjoying it. When I get towards the end, I'll go and clean up the rest of the side stories. The sub-stories, rather. I think one of the main things is that, like, the ones I've got left for Majima are all of the hostess ones. Well, not all of the hostess ones, but a couple of the hostess ones. And then I had to check because I couldn't find any others. And it turns out that there's at least one side quest to do with more dancing. And I just don't really like the dancing. I'm not very good at it. One of the ones I've got left for Kiryu is also dancing. And another one is the Pocket Racer stuff. And I'm just not very good at Pocket Racer. Like, I'm okay, but not very good. So that's been taking me a while too. But yeah, like, I've recorded at this point, I think, something like 83 episodes of Yakuza. And just about to come out is like episode 29 or something like that. So there's enough episodes of Yakuza to do until September at this point. So that will probably finish sometime around October. I'm not totally sure what I'm going to do when all of these finish. And I don't mean like when the LPs finish going up. I mean when I finish recording them. Because I'm recording them like so far in advance of them going up that once I finish recording all of them, I'm going to have like so much more free time that I don't know what to do with. And knowing me, that means I'll just start yet another LP, which means I'll then have 3 going at once. Well, sorry, no, I've already got 3 going at once, haven't I? I'll have like 4 going at once, and like so on and so forth. Like, I like doing the LPs because they're like not a huge amount of work, but they also like force me to play games. Some of which that I'm like not like avoiding, but games which I'd find it hard to justify putting the time into otherwise. Like, I've always liked the idea of the Yakuza games, but I've never actually put much time into them. I think I've played about 20 minutes of 4. And then nothing else. So, actually, like, getting to doesn't sound right, because I've always had the ability to, and having an excuse to, again, doesn't sound right, but more like having the impetus, like this was a Patreon goal, so I have to do it. I feel like saying that makes it come across like it's going to put on a load of pressure to me, but it's actually more like it's freed me up to enjoy doing it instead, as opposed to like worrying about how I could be doing other things in the meantime. This is essentially something that I have to do, which means I can do it whenever I want. I feel like I've done something good for doing it, and I do something good for doing it because like I get a video out of it at the end. I also have a load of other Patreon goals, which are basically all for LPs. So you can help me reach any of those if you feel like it. I think the next one's for Metal Gear Solid, because I've never played Metal Gear Solid. Never played any of the Metal... Well, I say never played. I've played a bit of 2, and I played some of Revengeance, but I've never played like a Metal Gear game properly. Another goal is for Kingdom Hearts, because that's a thing. Like, I know people like it, but I have like never touched it. But yeah. So, speaking of Patreon, I guess I'll do my outro now. I don't really have much else to talk about. I was going to talk a little bit about the PlayStation thing where they said they were going to take the PSP, the PS3 and the Vita offline. But then they also reversed that decision. Well, they reversed it for the PS3 and the PS Vita, so there's not really much for me to talk about anymore. Like, good job not fucking up. Like, you fucked up, realised you fucked up, and fixed it. Like, I don't think you deserve praise for not doing a bad thing. You could say that they could get praise because they'd, like, listened to feedback, but they didn't need to listen to feedback. Like, they didn't need to do this in the first place. They said they did it for, like, issues with, like, making money off it and stuff. Maybe you would make money off PS3 games digitally if you could play them on any console other than the PS3. Like, you have 2 solutions for this issue. You're not making enough money on the console because it's not selling enough games. Either you stop selling them, which is the choice they went with, or you find a way of making those games playable somewhere else. And I understand there's architecture issues with the PS3, but it really feels like at some point in the last, when did the PS4 come out? It's 2013. So, what, 8 years? Some point in the last 8 years, maybe you could have started looking at working out ways of getting the PS3 games to play somewhere else. Like, this is a situation where the issue is entirely of your own creation. You do not get praise for not fucking it up more. Just look at what Microsoft's doing. Like, I don't like the Xbox because it feels like a bit of a waste. It doesn't really have any exclusives, and I can get like all of the games on PC, so why would I get one? But in terms of backwards compatibility, there is nothing but praise you can give it. And Sony are doing like everything they can to not do that, and it makes no sense to me. Surely people would want it even more if you could play all of your games on it. As it is, I've got like all of my consoles still hooked up because there is no way of playing PS3 games otherwise. Like, granted, I don't play very many of them, but if I wanted to, I would need to. Just find some way of making those games run on a PS5. I'm sure you can do it. And then maybe they'll start selling again, and then you'll get money from it. Again, there were 2 solutions to this issue, and you chose the bad one, and then reverted your decision. That does not merit praise. That, if anything, merits more derision for not doing the one you should have done. Anyway, that clearly wasn't an outro. I'll do my outro now. Special thanks to all my patrons, but particularly our new patron, Bad. You can join them over at patreon.com/Holden Gatsby, and for $1 a month you'll get to see what I'm working on early, get exclusive roles in my Discord, along with any other rewards I might think of. You can also just follow me there if you want to for free, as it's probably the best place to see all of my content as soon as it's available. There's links to the Patreon, along with my Discord, Twitter, Twitch, and all other podcast platforms in the description of this episode. Finally, don't forget you can email me using podencastby@gmail.com if you've got anything you want to say. Thanks for sticking around. Bye. Special thanks to my patrons Heaven Over Hell, Justin Wood, Hobbs, Koopy Vegeta, Gunrunner, and Water.